Welcome to the SDA Housing Podcast, brought to you by NDIS Property Australia. Before starting this episode, we need to provide a general disclaimer. Information contained in this podcast is general in nature only. It does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. You need to consider your financial situation and needs before making any decisions based on the information in this podcast. And you should consider seeking independent and professional advice for your personal circumstances. All right, let's begin.
Hello everybody, my name is Eryn and Luba and I are your hosts today from NDIS Property Australia, and you're listening to the SDA Housing Podcast, a show that explains, highlights, guides and brings awareness about all things SDA in this ever-changing NDIS world. Today's exciting guest speaker is Zoe Simmons. Zoe, how are you?
Oh, hi, I'm great. Thank you so much for having me here.
Yeah, hello. Hi. Hi, Zoe.
So our first question is just a bit about you. So you're an award-winning author, which is incredible, amazing. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your book and you and your work?
Yeah, sure. So I have a lot of titles. Journalist, copywriter, editor, author, speaker, and disability advocate. So I am a freelance journalist. I write a lot about disability, and whether that's my own stories or stories from other people, I feel like we need to raise awareness about and create change. I also run my own copywriting and editing business. So I work with a lot of organizations, specifically in the health and disability space, helping them find their perfect words, no matter what that might be, whether it's writing web pages or blogs or reports or literally anything with words. I'm also an author on top of all that, which is absolutely wild. I remember thinking as a 16-year-old that it was my dream to become an author, but I chose to be a journalist because I thought it would be easier for job prospects, which it is, but it's really cool that I have been published in a couple of books now. 3, actually. One on ethical journalism. I wrote a little bit about ethical journalism, why it matters, and that journalists really need to do better. I wrote a chapter on my experiences in the 2019-2020 Black Summer bushfires and how my journalism helped not only me but my community survive and heal. And also I have had 2 poems published in Tea with My Monster, which is a anthology filled with mental health poems and prose, which was really cool. I wrote mine about chronic pain and disability, and I love poems. So it's amazing that I've been able to get published. I feel like teenage me will be very, very, very excited. And I'm currently writing my first book, which I'm pitching to publishers and literary agents, hoping I can get someone to help me, please. But it is about my experiences as a disabled journalist in the Black Summer bushfires, as well as the stories of survival from people in my town. Because unfortunately, I went back home to my hometown of Batemans Bay in the New South Wales South Coast, 2019, right to be hit by a bushfire on New Year's Eve, which was the most terrifying experience of my life. And, you know, all these stories came out, and I tried to do my best to capture the stories in my community, but it just wasn't enough in a 1,000-word article. So I decided to start writing a book and just sharing our traumas and our lessons and our stories and the unique perspectives you don't really see shown, like disability in a natural disaster, for example, isn't something people tend to think of. So I've got my experiences as well as another wheelchair user, which is pretty interesting to see how people navigated during that time. But yeah, I'm really hoping I can get it out into the world. And as a speaker, I also try and raise awareness about disability, how it impacts us all, things like ableism and stigma and accessibility. And these are things that we don't really hear in traditional mainstream media, which is why I'm so passionate about talking about them so much and just really showing what it's like and that we really, really, really need to change.
Luba and I were actually having a conversation about ableism yesterday and just what it is and how it's really a big issue that people don't so much talk about.
No,
like all the things are sort of swept under the rug, really.
Yeah, it's absolutely swept under the rug. I didn't even realize what internalized ableism was until like a year ago. And, you know, I've been living with this my whole life, and I think a lot of people live with it and they don't ever really think about it and consider it, but it does have harmful impacts to everyone, specifically the disability community, but also non-disabled people too. That idea that we should push through even when we're not well, or, that we should be doing things. And it's exhausting and it's not accessible, and it really forces people to work beyond their means, especially when you're disabled or chronically ill. And it just really needs to change. We need to talk about it, and we need to understand that this does impact everyone, but we also need to understand from a disabled perspective that it's particularly important to unlearn those things and to accept that people will do what they need to look after themselves, or what they need to avoid to look after themselves. It's a really complicated thing, and you feel a lot of guilt and you feel a lot of ick for it, but that guilt is caused by ableism, because you're expected to be and act and behave and think a certain way when that doesn't work for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. As I was listening to you right now, Zoe, I was nodding a lot, because not only we had this conversation with Eryn yesterday, but I was actually thinking about it a bit more in my own experience with ableism, and trying to fit in, and when, or perform in something that you think is more appropriate way to perform, and I think as we dealing, we can deal with things differently, the same task, or we can approach it differently from our own perspective, and from the level of the abilities that we have. There's nothing wrong with that. So yeah, you're right. This issue just not only an issue for the community of people with disability, but it touches pretty much every single life. Yeah.
Yeah. And disabled people often have non-disabled people around them who harbor these really harmful opinions. And that can be a big drain too, because you spend all this time realizing, oh, hey, there's this thing in my brain that's telling me I need to do or be or act a certain way, but I'm really struggling to do it and I can't do it. For example, for me, that is that I often use mobility aids because it really, really hurts to walk. And I also have chronic fatigue along with chronic pain. So sometimes that's the only way I can function, is to use a mobility aid. And I have a lot of people telling me, that I'm too young, I'm not disabled enough, that, I should be doing everything I can to not use that. But that causes a lot of harm. And, it's these attitudes and these internalized stigmas that we have that are just really, really wrong. And, it was a big thing for me to unlearn it. And I know it's a big thing for the people around me as well, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't address it and look through it. And it's not a bad thing to say that you have ableist attitudes or you've internalized ableism, because we all unconsciously have them. But it's about looking at them and thinking, hey, okay, how I'm having this opinion, why I'm actually having this opinion, does it help that person? Can that person actually do the thing? And why am I reacting so strongly to this? Because I think a lot of people, not disabled people specifically, get a bit angry when disabled people set their boundaries and admit their limitations. Which is not a bad thing. I can't do a cartwheel. That's not something that I'm ashamed about. I also can't walk very well, and sometimes, and those aren't bad things. Everyone has different things that impacts them, and it shouldn't be seen with this negative light.
People don't realize what they're saying until they experience it, is one thing that I think is really hard for people to grasp.
Yeah, it's so hard, especially when you have invisible or dynamic disabilities. Exactly like that, because some days you might be fine. You might be able to go out and walk and function for a bit, and people are like, oh, but you don't look sick. But also the impacts of doing those things, people often don't see how bad it gets and how sick you get as a result of having those moments where you do, I guess, try and pretend that you're a functional person.
Absolutely. I do relate to every single word, even though, just from my personal perspective and experience. I have two questions. So question number one, where people can find your previous works that you just mentioned. And question number two, how people can help you with the current book, because you just mentioned that you need support, right?
Yes, I
Right.
do need help. Well, with my book, the hardest part at the moment is that I'm trying to juggle my paid work as well as my health and all the things that come with living, plus then trying to write a book which currently does not pay me. So I unfortunately can't go full time into it because I won't be able to pay my bills and survive. So I guess like general support helps so much, whether it's following me on social media or, telling me that you think my work matters, because it is really hard. I do feel so bad that it's taken me so long, but it's also really traumatic. So I think it's okay that I've taken a break, but I do get afraid that, the more time goes on that people won't care. I am constantly being told that is not correct, so I'm hoping publishers agree. But I guess if anyone also knows any publishers or literary agents or, anything to help me, support me on this journey would be amazing. I do have like one of those buy me a coffee pages, but I've never actually posted it. I probably should. That might be a not bad way to be able to write, but still have people supporting me. But yeah, really anything would be nice. I think it all counts, whether it's me trying to grow my social media presence, where it's me with my advocacy. I think that also helps as well, in many, many ways, not just me personally, obviously, but, trying to help other people through that. But I mean, I think the main thing about my book is that it's mostly not me. It is mostly the people in my community, and our stories mean a lot to us. So having just people care really, really matters. And in terms of where you can find my other work, I do have them listed on my website, I'm pretty sure, or I will add it to my website. Which is at www.zoesimmons.com.au, or you can probably just Google Zoe Simmons journalist and I should come up. But yeah, I really appreciate anyone that has any kind of thought to help. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Zoe. So originally we've come across you, Zoe, through an online article about what I would briefly describe as a fight for justice with Qantas or against Qantas. Or this fight shouldn't have happened, but unfortunately took place and went on for a while. So could you tell us what happened and when it happened and what is happening right now with this story where you are at?
Oh, yeah. So I hadn't traveled with my wheelchair before by plane. I'd heard lots of horror stories, so I was kind of expecting it, but hoping to be an exception. Unfortunately, I was not. I took 2 flights and stuff happened on both flights that non-disabled people just don't have to experience. Like getting there, for example, not that this is related to Qantas, but when they do the pat-down searches, because you can't go through the metal scanners like someone that walks, I wasn't told that I was going to get a pat-down search. I wasn't asked for my consent. Someone just put their hands on my boobs. And they're like, yep, cool, we're doing it. They didn't even say we're doing a pat-down search. They just did that. And I was like, okay, that is traumatizing. Yeah. And like you constantly get called wheelchair. They touch you without consent in multiple ways and like get angry at you for trying to move yourself. And like, it's like they don't expect that someone in a wheelchair can have independence and capacity. It's just, it's really crappy. But unfortunately on the plane, my wheelchair was broken. My left brake was broken by Qantas, and I got off the plane and I noticed it was broken, and I tried to tell someone. I was kind of ignored at first, and then I was like, hey, no, it's broken. What do I do? So I went to the baggage people. I explained what happened, and they gave me a little piece of paper with a code that I had to apply online to get reimbursed, basically, or to, make my case and lodge my case. So I did that, and the next day I received an email that said they considered a broken brake to be minor damage, and they weren't going to help me at all for that. Like,
just to clarify, Zoe, is your wheelchair, is it electric or is it a manual?
Manual. So they said it was minor damage, and I was just so enraged by that. Not even just for me, but for every other mobility aid user that has to deal with this. Like, it is so common. We don't keep the statistics in Australia as far as I'm aware, but I know I saw a study recently in the US that it's 29 wheelchairs a day in the US that get broken or damaged. A day. So this is a massive issue worldwide, and just knowing that it affects so many people in so many different ways, not just broken mobility aids, but poor treatment as well, humiliating treatment, not being able to get off the plane, which has happened to many of my friends, also being forgotten on the plane, which that's a fun thing. Yeah. Being forgotten on the plane.
Just left on there.
Literally.
They all just get off and you're just still on there.
Literally. Oh, like 40 minutes it took someone to come, and they were like yelling and trying to get people's attention, but that's just how we're treated quite regularly. It's really crappy, and it's not good enough. So even though my own story is really, really small in the scheme of things, I was just filled with collective disabled rage and just thought, no, this is like a really rich organization. They can't just get away with treating people like this, specifically disabled people. And like, a break isn't minor. I need it to move. I mean, not to move, but, to stop. That's also pretty important.
Yeah, that's like saying that, your brake pad's broken on your car. It's fine.
I hope they don't think the airplane's brakes are minor.
Yeah, literally.
That's a good way to put it.
I complained again, and they gave me the same answer pretty much, and it wasn't until I started posting about it online. I got so angry. I made posts across multiple social media sites. I even made a video where it was cute little video of Qantas rejecting, but they went viral with multiple news outlets covering, and I got commissioned to write my own. And conveniently, at that point, I got contacted by their advocacy team and was told, it was an internal error and you should have always been brought to us because we care about mobility aid users and yada, 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 yada. But, I mean, the fact that I had to go through 2 no's before that, and it was only conveniently when my story went viral that they changed their tune, I'm a bit dubious.
Yeah, it's not a coincidence. Doubt so. But so is it where it at? Like they've basically apologized or said that it was a mistake and they're sorry, or has anything evolved out of it? Or?
Yeah, I mean, in the first 2 responses, no one even said sorry to me for breaking my chair. It wasn't until I pointed out that no one had said sorry to me that someone said sorry to me, and I was like, cool, that should have been the first thing when you break someone's property, let alone a mobility aid that is someone's legs. The fact that I'm an ambulatory wheelchair user doesn't change that that's important. And so yeah, they eventually offered to either reimburse me for the cost of my chair or for the damage. I ended up deciding to get a different chair because mine was pretty much the cheapest on the market. And I thought, hey, maybe I might get a slightly nicer one, although it's not like I just paid for a new chair for me. I'm still hundreds of dollars out of pocket. So I didn't even get a good chair. It was just the next slightly less cheap option. Some chairs cost $30,000 plus. My chair was super duper cheap, but my point is that it's not about me. It's about what this represents collectively for so many people. And I'm pretty sure I've heard stories of people in the US dying because their mobility aids have been broken because they need those custom things for their body, and without them, they literally can't do anything. Well, not much. Sorry, I don't know if that's accurate because, disability can do stuff, but
those certain things help them just to go about their day-to-day lives. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you've described that really well. You said this is my legs. This is our legs. The wheelchair. This is essential.
If non-disabled people had their legs broken every single time they got on a plane, you would not get on a plane. Or if you had something lost or broken every single time, or you knew you were going to be treated a certain way, you'd be terrified of flying. And that's the reality for many disabled people. You're anxious every single time you get on a plane because it's like, am I going to be respected? Are they going to treat me well? Are my access needs going to be met? And since speaking out about this, so many people have contacted me to share their own stories. Someone told me that they had to crawl off the plane. Someone else didn't have the proper lifts to get off, so they had to use a garbage lift to get off the plane. That's nice. Someone else had to help their partner onto the plane because there wasn't a ramp. another person recently, I heard, they couldn't get off the plane and they were told not to come back because we can't get you off the plane because they don't have the correct ramps. And yeah, this is common. Like multiple airports across Australia, I've heard this. And it does get swept under the rug. It's really shitty. One of my friends actually got a concussion from their treatment and a broken rib because they were on the aero bridge in an aisle chair. And I'm not sure if you or anyone listening to this has been on or seen an aisle chair, but they're like half the size of normal wheelchairs. They sometimes have armrests, they sometimes don't. They sometimes have seatbelts, they sometimes don't. In this case, none of those were being used. So, you're going up a rickety air bridge, maybe we're not the best abdominal muscles, and then, having someone that doesn't really care and is jagging you, throwing you around everywhere. And they hit their head on the metal and glass of the flight bridge and got a concussion. And then were blamed by the staff member for not holding on tight enough.
Yeah. Wow. Well,
I don't even know what to say.
Yeah, we're having a moment right now. Because we apparently, obviously, we do not hear much about that. Thanks for bringing to, more awareness into this space by sharing these stories, Zoe.
That's why I'm so passionate about speaking about it, because we don't hear about these things. And I had so many trolls telling me that I was attention seeking or making it up. And I'm like, do you not realize how big these issues are for so many people around the world? And like, I was in even the Disability Royal Commission recently about it, and being in that room and hearing the people talking there, it is really bad. And it's not just one airline, it's not just one airport, it is everything, and it needs an overhaul. It's not good enough. And even like the complaints process is really inaccessible. Like, it took me days and days and days of fighting and arguing to actually get a response. And I kept being told, like, oh, fill in this form. No, do this form. Supply this stuff you've already supplied. Oh, actually, we can't do that. We'll have to do this. So it took literally a month for the resolution to occur. And I had chronic fatigue. That meant I had to give up work. The stress of that impacted me a lot. And, if that's happening to me, it's absolutely happening to other people. And I think a lot of people are just too tired to fight, and it's really not good enough. We shouldn't have to fight. We shouldn't have to hope to be an exception to the norm. The norm should be that disabled people are treated well and respected, and not having our mobility aids broken every time we go to an airline.
100%. So your wheelchair then, were you without it for however long it took, what'd you say, a month to get a resolution?
Yeah, so I ended up ordering myself a chair just because I didn't really want to deal with Qantas, and I was like, even if they don't reimburse me, I still need one. Yeah. Because I had to go to some events the weekend it broke, unfortunately, and I couldn't use my wheelchair because it wasn't working. So I think it was like a week or two, but that still did suck. I mean, I am mostly inside the house. So it's only generally when I go to events or maybe shopping, or when I don't know if there's going to be seats, or if I'm having a particularly bad pain day. But I don't know what my body's going to do. So it was really kind of like just hoping that my body was going to function and be able to exist and still, like get myself food, for example. So it was really nerve-wracking not knowing if I was going to have that support, and just hoping that my body would be good.
That's not okay.
That's outrageous. Yeah.
And I would like to recognize that I have a lot of privilege in being an ambulatory wheelchair user, because I don't have to experience a lot of things that you don't get. Like, for example, I don't have to necessarily worry about a ramp at an airline, because worst comes to worst, I can use my walking stick and like manage all right most of the time, unless I'm in a really bad flare, in which case I can't move at all. But most people don't, sorry, not most people, a lot of people don't have that option. And like I keep saying, it doesn't matter my specific circumstances. It matters that this affects a lot of people.
Definitely. Well, I guess that sort of leads into another question. We briefly saw you in Hobart last week when we were down there for the SDA conference, and we just wanted to ask you, how was Hobart in terms of accessibility? What were your thoughts? Obviously, I assume you flew down. How was that in comparison?
thankfully my experience flying to Hobart was a lot better. There were still some things, like, for example, they left my wheelchair and one of my friends' wheelchairs, who has an electric chair, by the way, in the rain.
Oh.
So even though mine's
damaged?
manual and it thankfully wasn't damaged, but like it could have been. It was electric chair
100%.
in the rain.
And it wasn't just like light rain either. It was raining.
Yes.
Yeah, and like I had to self-transfer in that, and like then my wheelchair was super wet, which wasn't a pleasant feeling. It's just like, do you not even think? But aside from that, it was mostly pretty good. Hobart's accessibility, I mean, I found it particularly hard in a manual wheelchair with all the slopes. So
It's very hilly.
I ended up having to be walking with my walking stick, and I got like 2 days in, and I was in so much pain that I was just like dying. And it wasn't even that far. It was maybe like 1 kilometer at most. But, you know, I had to take painkillers to do that. I had to stretch to do that. And like at the end of the day, I wouldn't be able to function. So I eventually hired an electric wheelchair, which had a lot of ableism and stigma to work through in that. Even though I'd done a lot of work using mobility aids in the first place, my brain was like, oh no, an electric chair, you don't need that, and all those things your brain tells you, and like non-disabled people tell you. But it made a huge difference. It meant I was able to like zoom around town and hang out with people, and, you know, yeah, I can come to that restaurant, let me just roll up.
Roll up.
Yes.
We were like a whole bunch of wheelchair users, which was awesome. Like, it has been so long since I've been able to spend a day out and just be. Like, I haven't had that in many, 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 many years. It's usually there's someone else pushing me, or me doing a little bit and struggling to exist with that little bit, and always dealing with the consequences. So to have something that really helped, well, it really helped. Although I did see some ridiculous things, like, for example, you know how wheelchair users need lifts to like navigate getting to different levels. There's like no other way you can get to another level without an elevator. This one was down the stairs. You have to go down the stairs to catch the elevator. It's like,
wait, what?
That defeats the purpose of an elevator.
So you had to get into the elevator to go wherever you needed to go, you had to walk downstairs.
Yep. And it was like me and a wheelchair using friend just being like, are you serious?
That doesn't even make any sense.
Wow.
Stuff like that happens a lot, though. It's ridiculous. You just have to laugh.
You don't like when I was in Hobart, obviously, last week. Yeah, I'm just not aware of all those details, you know. It's just. So I listened to a podcast episode with you, and I learned that it is only recently that you started thinking about yourself as someone with a disability. Obviously, you've had a journey, and it took you some time to arrive to this point. At this point, can you tell us a bit more about your personal experience with your disability and how it affects? Obviously, you already told us that you experienced a lot of pain, but whatever other things that you would like to share.
So technically, I've been disabled my whole life, but I did not know that in multiple ways with multiple disabilities. But it wasn't until I think around May last year that I actually started feeling I wasn't really comfortable, but I just started identifying as disabled because I saw that it really resonated with me. And, you know, we think of disability in a really narrow lens in traditional media, and invisible and dynamic disabilities are not represented basically at all. So it took me a long time to recognize that what I was experiencing were barriers, and, you know, my conditions do impact my ability to exist and to function, and that's not a bad thing. We see disability a lot as this stigmatized, shameful thing, and like when I started identifying as disabled, someone was like, "Oh, that's so sad," or like, "Don't call yourself that," and just really infantilizing stuff. Like, well, it is, and that's not a bad thing. So I have been living with mental illness for my whole life, well, at least as long as I can remember, through bipolar and anxiety. I've also been autistic my whole life, and didn't actually realize that until a month or two ago. So those multiple disabilities, but I also experience chronic pain and chronic fatigue through fibromyalgia and adenomyosis. But all of these things, I never realized they were disabilities. And I remember with the adenomyosis, while I don't have a diagnosis for that, I do have all the symptoms, and my specialist is like, there's no doubt in my mind. So I'm not quite sure that's not a diagnosis, but whatever. But I started noticing, even as early as being 12, that my periods were so painful that I, couldn't run. I couldn't participate in PE. I went to the sick bay. I had days off, and people just kept telling me that, it's just in your head, push through. Periods are supposed to be painful. And it's not until I was like 22, maybe 23, around that realm, that I broke my wrist. I realized my abdominal pain actually hurt more than a broken bone. And I was like, okay, that's not normal. And I started noticing all these other symptoms that I thought they were normal, but I didn't realize they weren't until I started talking to people about them. I didn't realize that everyone doesn't constantly have pins and needles, and that their hands and legs don't go numb like multiple times a day, whereas mine do. I thought that was just normal. Now I know that's a fibromyalgia thing. But I was experiencing this abdominal pain constantly, and outside of periods, and then fatigue and brain fog and these pins and needles and insomnia. And it just was such an awful feeling, and it is an awful feeling. And the fatigue is so much more than just being a little bit tired. It's literally struggling to function, struggling to think, to hear, to move. I remember not too long ago, I was so tired, I could not work out how to charge my phone. I couldn't work out how to plug the plug thing into the wall and then the cordy thing into the phone. It was just too many steps. My brain was just so tired. I was just going to let my phone die. But that's how tired it is. It's not being able to function. It's like you're swimming underwater in a sea of hardening concrete and just screaming internally, but you can't function. And then add pain to that, add fatigue, add insomnia to that, add the pins and needles that make your legs and limbs go numb, and brain fog, and so many other things I'm probably forgetting because I've said brain fog. But just so many different kinds of pain, like nerve pain, bone pain, and feeling like you've been beaten and stabbed. And that's pretty much my daily. And I do just diminish myself. I think a lot of people with invisible and dynamic disabilities do diminish yourselves. But at the end of the day, it's not normal to be in pain.
So since you realized that you found the names, the proper words for what's happening with you, were you able to find the right level of support?
I feel like there is a significant lack of support for people who live with conditions like chronic pain and chronic fatigue. So to be honest, no, I didn't really feel supported, especially by the medical industry. I remember about 5 years ago when I started approaching a doctor about this pain and thinking, that's not normal. I spoke to a doctor for maybe 5 minutes about it, and she was like, oh, it's dairy. And I was like, no, it's not. And she's like, yes, it is. I said, it can't be. I'm vegan. I don't eat dairy. And then she just turned around and said, oh, it's because you're overweight then. No tests, no nothing. Just telling me that it's in my head, basically, which has unfortunately been a pretty common experience. It's been really hard to beg healthcare practitioners to listen, to care, to diagnose, to believe. I'm often told, it doesn't matter what condition you have because we'll treat you the same anyway. And it's like, well, it does matter. It matters in terms of being able to get NDIS support or the DSP or any other kind of things that can help you, as well as identifying yourself and feeling like you can advocate. So there hasn't really been much support from the medical industry. There's been a few specialists and a few things that I think help. I do think osteo and physio and massage helps ease the body pain. Psychology does help me, but that's also because I have a complex mental illness and neurodivergency. But I think most of the things I've learned have been from other disabled people and, groups on Facebook, like the Chronically Fully Sick group. I would 1,000% recommend it if anyone is listening and wants to just be in a group of people that get pain and fatigue and all the things that disability can include, and also in like a funny way. It's also a podcast, which I would absolutely recommend. They are hilarious and make me feel just laughing at all the crappiness we have to deal with, basically. But yeah, so the things like I found support have been, honestly, finding the disability community has been the biggest thing for me, because when I started experiencing these things, I didn't know anyone else who experienced them. I felt really alone. I was kind of gaslighting myself as well as the medical industry gaslighting me. And, then you see your story reflected in someone else. You're like, hey, no, I'm just being really harsh to myself. And I'm not the problem. This is a systemic issue that we need to change. Having people that just understood and got it and were like, yeah, you're allowed to call yourself disabled. If you think you're disabled, you probably are. And that's a really good thing. So yeah, that has been my best support, I think.
It's wonderful. We'll add those links into the description.
Yep, I've been writing everything down.
Yeah, so anyone else could benefit from this information. You shared with us that you are applying for NDIS at the moment. Is it right? How's it going? What sort of support you're looking for from NDIS?
I honestly didn't know that I could even apply for NDIS until about maybe a year or two ago. Again, I think a lot of gaslighting myself, and I think it is very hard to get support with invisible disabilities from the NDIS, especially when it comes to things like pain. I've been told that it's quite likely I'm not going to get accepted, which really, really, really sucks. I've been working on my application for about a year now. It is just a really big, really exhausting process, especially trying to get all the letters from people, making sure they have the right wording, like fully treated and permanent or something, and like making sure, that the medical professionals understand that as well, because, well, fibro doesn't have a cure, so it is permanent, it is lifelong. But it's been really challenging. I did get help from each to put an application in. I didn't know that you could get NDIS providers to help you apply, which has been really nice because they have to do all the arguing now, not me. But it still does take a long time. And getting my autism diagnosis was part of that as well. And then I also had to go through a process to get my mental illnesses confirmed by a psychiatrist, and then, occupational assessments and so many things. And I'm really hoping I can get it eventually. Hopefully I can apply by the end of the year. But I'm hoping for just anything that could help. Like literally anything would help. But I think when you live with pain and fatigue, basic everyday things are not basic everyday things. Like cooking and cleaning and gardening and going to the shops and admin, they're just these mammoth tasks that if I'm working, I can't do any of those things. I kind of have to choose between the thing. And, if I'm working, I'm probably not going to be able to cook a meal for myself because I don't have the energy for all of it, and, vice versa. So it does really impact on your quality of life. So I'm really hoping I can get help with that, as well as a mobility aid that's actually good. That would be nice. I would love a power assisted chair. So I could, manual wheel whenever I could, and also because it's great for your biceps. Get some wheelchair guns there. But something that would help when I'm really tired or when there's slopes, which there are slopes everywhere and you don't notice it until you're in a chair.
So a power assisted chair, does that work like you sort of just switch on like a battery and it goes into more of an electric mode?
As far as I'm aware, I think there's like a little button, or you can get some with different attachments. I'm not super familiar with it because I looked into it the first time and the cheapest chair for that was about $4,000. Yeah, no, can't afford that. I didn't do a thorough Google, so I may be wrong there, but that's just what I saw when I Googled, and I was like, not really an option unless I get NDIS.
Right, so the application will be ready by the end of the year. That's
so.
Yeah.
I need help.
How do you want to see things change? Maybe specifically in Australia, or I know you mentioned earlier a bit about America in terms of flying and things like that. So how do you want to see things change to be more inclusive for people with disabilities?
Oh boy, that's a big topic. There's so many things we could say there, but I think one of the basic things is showing accurate disability representation, which is something I'm really big on as a journalist and as a storyteller, trying to make sure we have intersectional voices included and showing people from all different types of disability, not just through the lens of, say, a white, disabled, rich man. Our experiences are not the same. So someone that is LGBT or trans or non-binary or a person of color or low income or any other thing that can affect you is really important to show those experiences too, and not just using disability as a trauma narrative, but showing like the joy in it too, and that it's not a bad thing to be disabled. It's not a bad thing to use mobility aids. I think that would go a long way to changing public attitudes, and I would say policy as well, because there are so many things we need, like the support structures that are supposed to help us, like NDIS and the disability support pension. They're not accessible. They are very difficult to get on. They take a lot of energy to do it, and a lot of people simply can't do that and don't have the energy to keep fighting. I just wish things were so much more accessible, and I wish that accessibility was actually considered. Like, for example, no one even puts their accessibility information on their websites. So if you want to go somewhere, you have to call them and be like, hey, are you accessible? And even then, they don't understand what that means. I once called up a shop when I was writing an article about accessible travel, and they're like, oh, yeah, we're wheelchair accessible, but the wheelchair can't fit through our aisles, or but the toilet isn't accessible, but all these things. And like, it's more than also just wheelchair access too. It's considering people who have impaired vision and impaired hearing and autism and, you know, things like sensory overload, as well as, you know, are there stairs? Are there seats for people to rest on? Is COVID safety being used? So many things that no one ever really thinks of or advocates for unless it impacts you, which really sucks. I really wish that some of our disability allies could help us with this battle. And if you notice, you know, there's no access to information, okay, ask them and encourage them to do it. So it's not just us doing it all the time. And making sure we're included in spaces. You know, there's so many things, and it's just never considered that someone might have a disability or one that you can't see. It's really harmful. And, you know, I think that would go a lot of the way to like making sure we can support people financially, making mobility aids cheaper. It is ridiculous that mobility aids cost more than my car. Like, and then even then, if you have a mobility aid, it's still so challenging. Like, if you have an electric chair, you can't just pick it up and put it in your car. Yeah. There's so many things and so many barriers, and all of them are so expensive and so exhausting. And I think that all really, really needs to change. And I think representation is a big part of that. I think addressing stigma and ableism is a big part of that, as well as educating maybe in schools, but also more representation and leadership. And, you know, we need more disabled politicians. All these disability-specific areas should be headed by disabled people. You know, I think they should all be done by people with lived experience. Like, you can't, like, not being the Minister for Women if you're a man, for example. Like, you should have experience of these spaces that you're working in if you're going to head these organizations. But that doesn't happen, of course, because there can't possibly be qualified disabled people for these positions.
NDIA recently, I think there's been 2 people with disability recently on the board. So it's definitely, I can see there's a lot of hope, and for NDIA with, you know, Bill Shorten coming into the scene. So, and with that huge review they're going through right now. But yeah, and hopefully that will bring to broader or better representation, just what you were talking about, Zoe. So yeah, well, let's see. I think they're supposed to present the results September next year.
There is something extra I could say.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even accessing our healthcare system is so difficult. And that is ridiculous, because disabled people are one of the primary users of the healthcare system. And yet we're being forced to attend appointments in person, which is really not accessible for a lot of people. Telehealth is being taken away. We're not heard. And, you know, even when you get into working for these health organizations as lived experience, the positions aren't accessible, and like they often expect you to do a lot of unpaid work. And it's just ridiculous how much they want to profit off you, but not making it accessible for you to participate. As an example, why telehealth is so important, I went to an appointment not too long ago at a hospital. It was about a 40-minute drive away. So that still in itself, there and back, is still a lot of energy. There are only 2 accessible parks at the whole hospital, which was great. But unfortunately, it meant I had to I had to walk like a kilometer away. And I had my wheelchair, and I had to go uphill, and obviously I can't push myself uphill. So I had to push my chair uphill and just use the chair on the flats. But by the time I got to the location, to the front door of the hospital, I was in so much pain. I was crying. I was really not well, so much so that the reception people were like, "Do you need medical attention?" I'm like, "No, I'm just here for an appointment." They just don't listen to that. And they're like, "Oh, we need to see you in person because we treat you better." I'm like, well, if you can't treat me good as a person online or on the phone, you probably shouldn't be a healthcare practitioner. But it's just ridiculous that they don't consider us, and it's so hard for us to get into these spaces to share this lived experience because it's not accessible, and so much of it is expected to be unpaid. We need to have spaces specifically for disabled people to contribute to service design and service improvement. Forcing appointments, and then like I got sicker just from tending my appointment than I would if I could have just had a phone call at home.
Yeah. And so are they getting rid of telehealth scrapped?
They're talking about it, yeah. I don't know the specifics about it, honestly, because it makes me angry and anxious, but I'm telling every single medical practitioner I can and speaking about it as much as I can because it's just crap. Like, the healthcare system has to be accessible, and it's not even if you just have problems physically getting to a location. Like, that is a huge issue, but it's also things like if you have a job, if you have caring responsibilities, if you live remotely, if you can't afford the cost to get to a location. There's so many things and so many marginalized groups that are impacted, and they just don't seem to care.
Interesting. All right, Luba, do you have any last questions you want to ask?
No, I guess no questions, but I wanted to thank you, Zoe, for joining our podcast today. We are SDA focused podcast, but obviously we want a very good representation from people with disability, because if we want to design more accessible spaces, in our case it's the housing, we have to hear directly from participants or people with disability, and we want people who are not experiencing that, not in this position, right? Just to be more aware about where you coming from.
Thanks so much, Zoe, for coming on and sharing with us all about you and everything that's going on in your life and how you've gotten to where you are. We really, really appreciate you coming on and talking to us and educating our listeners, especially because a lot of our listeners are people who are investing in SDA property and are looking to build houses for people with disabilities. I think it's really important to learn actually from people with disabilities themselves, what's going on in their lives, and really educate themselves on people with disabilities. I think that's really important. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. And I know I didn't talk that much about housing, but I think like a lot of the things I have spoken about are transferable and still important to consider, especially if you are working with disabled people. So thank you so much for having me on, and thank you anyone who's listening to me. I hope I helped at all, or at least helped make you feel not alone if you also experience pain. But yeah, thanks.
God, thank you so much. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Zoe.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please make sure you are subscribed and following us so you can keep in the loop with all of our upcoming episodes. We would really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating, a written review, and to share this podcast with those that could benefit. Until next time, catch you on the next episode.